According to a recent Gallup poll, the number of adults who identify as LGBTQ has doubled over the past decade, from 3.5% in 2012 to 7.1% in 2022. The poll reveals that those 25 and under are driving the numbers higher, as Generation Zers are adopting LGBTQ identities at an alarming rate. In fact, Barna reports that nearly 40% of 18 to 25-year-olds identify as LGBTQ. What accounts for the increased prevalence? It could be that our permissive culture makes it easier for people to self-identify as LGBTQ, resulting in more people coming out of the closet. Yet the increase is not consistent across generations, indicating that something unique is happening among the youth. Barna suggests the increase has more to do with peer acceptance than actual sexual desires. Their poll didn't ask about sexual attractions, but rather how someone, quote-unquote, identifies, which fits into a larger narrative. Millennials are a group that has trouble creating lasting, meaningful relationships. If their sense is that some of the people they want to be friends with are a group they want to be accepted by, is LGBTQ, then they'll identify with them in many cases for the sake of friendships, and not necessarily because of actual same-sex attractions or transgender desires. It's about image primarily, belonging and acceptance. It appears the surge in LGBTQ identified youth is linked to peer approval and social contagion instead of an increase in those who genuinely experience disordered sexual desires. The astronomical rise of rapid onset gender dysphoria, known as ROGD, among teen girls certainly fits into that narrative. More on that in the next video. As does the increase of girls identifying as bisexual or even asexual, not attracted to either sex. Teen girls are in the phase of learning what sexual desire is, and in today's over-sexed, LGBTQ saturated culture, they can sometimes confuse natural admiration of a beautiful woman or emotional closeness with a female peer with sexual desire. They may have no awareness that they are simply confused and pressured into adopting an identity that makes them feel special. Social contagion aside, there are 3 developmental influences that we commonly see among those who experience genuine same-sex attractions. 1. Gender nonconformity. 2. Adverse family dynamics. Or 3. Childhood sexual abuse. Those influences were common among the case studies in my dissertation research, and I often see them in regard to the young women I counsel. They are part of my own story as well. This is not to say that these 3 factors are the only ones that may contribute to sexual brokenness, but they are among the most common influences we see in research and practical experience. We will first summarize the research and then share examples of how developmental factors might play out in real life. 1. Gender nonconformity. Gender nonconformity refers to not fitting into a cultural gender stereotype, such as boys like sports and girls like to play with dolls. Psychologist Gerard van den Aardweg notes the correlation between gender nonconformity and homosexuality. The efforts of the last few decades to find evidence to support a biological theory have made it more doubtful than ever that such evidence will be found. In contrast, many studies have shown that the most significant factor which correlates with homosexuality is, quote, gender nonconformity, end quote, or same-sex peer isolation. According to the theory of gender nonconformity, a child's personality, temperament, or biological characteristics may conflict with cultural gender stereotypes, negatively affecting a child's self-perception. For example, a gender non-conforming boy may have a sensitive temperament, be more in touch with his emotions, and enjoy music, theater, art, or cooking with his mom or sisters instead of playing sports with other boys. In addition to his sensitive personality, he may have physical traits typically considered less masculine, like having a slight build, high cheekbones, long eyelashes, a higher voice, or being unable to grow a beard. A gender non-conforming girl may have a bold temperament, tough exterior, high aptitude in math, science. She may be athletically inclined, preferring to play football with the boys instead of dolls with the girls. She may also have physical traits considered less feminine, like a bigger body build, a deeper voice, a square jaw, or more body hair than a typical female. Because of cultural stereotypes, gender nonconforming children often feel different from their peers, unable to connect with their own gender in meaningful ways. Their sense of isolation is often compounded by peers who call them all sorts of names. The psychological trauma of such teasing may lead gender nonconforming children to question their masculinity or femininity. Consequently, they may grow up feeling like there's something deficient about their sexuality and that they'll never be a man among men or a woman among women. Their same-sex peers seem like an exotic species, leaving them with a longing to fit in, to become whole where they perceive themselves lacking. Because of the interrelatedness of spirit, soul, and body, the psychological trauma of being different registers in the soul, the mind, the will, and the emotions, which can affect a child's psychosexual development involving the body's response to sexual stimuli. Remember, the brain and sexuality are inextricably linked. To develop a stable sense of their own sexuality, children need meaningful connection with members of the same sex. We see this play out regularly as young boys build a treehouse with the universal sign above the door, "No girls allowed." Why? Because girls have cooties. As children progress into adolescence, they typically grow out of the boys-only, girls-only clubs and enter the mysterious stage in which they discover that those who once had cooties are now quite intriguing. That's all a normal part of our psychosexual development. Gender non-conforming children, however, sometimes find themselves stuck at the cooties stage because they were never able to complete the developmental milestone of identifying meaningfully with their own gender. As a result, they may feel like their own gender remains foreign to them. When their hormones kick in, their longing for same-sex acceptance can be confused with their God-given sex drive, resulting in attractions to the same sex. In the words of psychologist Daryl Bim, the exotic becomes erotic. Because opposites attract, gender nonconforming males may find themselves especially attracted to stereotypically masculine men, and gender nonconforming females may find themselves attracted to stereotypically feminine women. In this case, same-sex attractions, SSA, stem from a legitimate desire to connect meaningfully with the same sex. This unmet need becomes confused with God-given sexual desires that would ordinarily develop toward the opposite sex when a child feels secure as a boy among boys or as a girl among girls. Number 2, adverse family dynamics. Large-scale longitudinal studies over the past 40 years reveal that those with SSA, same-sex attractions, tend to have experienced higher rates of adverse family dynamics, such as parental separation or divorce, domestic violence, parental neglect, parental criminal activity, physical and psychological abuse, living apart from the same-sex parent, especially during the first 6 years of life, boys who have never met their father, girls whose mother died during adolescence. It comes as no surprise that children who lack meaningful connection with parents experience greater challenges in life. This is not to say that every child who grew up in a broken family will struggle with their sexuality, but many do. By God's design, every child is meant to have a father and a mother. Fathers invite their sons into the world of men and affirm their daughters as distinct from, yet cherished by, men. Mothers invite their daughters into the world of women and affirm their sons as distinct from, yet respected by, women. When God's design for the family is disrupted, for whatever reason, children pay the highest price because they need healthy investments from both a father and a mother to develop security in their sexuality. If a disruption with the same-sex parent occurs and no substitute mother or father figure steps in, children may grow up with a deficient for same-sex love that affects their psychosexual development. This disruption may be extreme, like the physical loss of a parent through death or divorce, or an emotional disconnect due to substance abuse or physical abuse. In some cases, this could be as minor as a subtle difference in personality temperament, whereby the same-sex parent doesn't know how to bond in a way that the child feels an emotional connection. We have counseled many individuals who have grown up with a well-meaning parent who simply wasn't able to connect in a way that felt meaningful to them. There was no malice on the part of the parent. They did everything they could to do to love well. But a child's perception of an emotional disconnect often has the greater influence than the parent's best intentions. Of course, the devil does everything he can to fuel the child's misperception. One man grew up thinking his father loved his athletic brother more because his brother bonded with their father through sports. Later in life, he discovered his assumption was simply a misperception fueled by the enemy. But for children, perception trumps reality. Children are incredible recorders of history, but terrible interpreters of reality. When children with a same-sex love deficit become teenagers, that emotional deficit can become confused with their God-given sex drive, so that their attractions fixate on the same sex instead of the opposite sex. Similar to the phenomenon of gender nonconformity, children with a same-sex love deficit become trapped in a pattern of arrested emotional development, unable to bond with the opposite sex until they first find security in same-sex connection. In this situation, the root of SSA, same-sex attraction, is not a sexual issue, but rather an emotional, relational deficit that becomes sexualized. It can feel like one is quote-unquote born that way, because in this case, same-sex attraction is a subconscious response to trauma, an unmet need, not a conscious choice to rebel. Again, spirit, soul, and body work in tandem so that the brain and sexuality are inextricably linked. We cannot divorce the emotional, relational deficits in our soul, mind, will, and emotions from our psychosexual development, mind and body. Consequently, we can't find fault with those who find themselves involuntarily attracted to the same sex. The attraction itself is not a sin, though meditating or acting upon it is. Rather, the disordered desire signals an unmet yearning in the soul that is manifesting in a sexual way. Elizabeth Moberly calls the urge for erotic same-sex love the reparative drive. In other words, it's a subconscious attempt to repair or satisfy an unmet, God-given yearning for same-sex love by bonding sexually with a member of the same sex. Yet a physical substitute cannot satisfy an emotional, relational deficit. The same principle lies at the root of any addictive behavior. We look to created things, food, sex, drugs, fame, money, achievements, etc., instead of our Creator to satisfy the yearning in our soul. Romans chapter 1, verse 25. Number 3, childhood sexual abuse. Not surprisingly, sexual abuse can impact a child's psychosexual development. Research indicates that compared to heterosexuals, non-heterosexuals are about 2 to 3 times as likely to have experienced childhood sexual abuse. To understand how childhood sexual abuse, also known as CSA, can affect a child, consider a young girl who is sexually abused by a male perpetrator. She may conclude that men are not safe and vow never to be vulnerable with a man ever again. Because the brain and sexuality are inextricably linked, the little girl cannot isolate the trauma in her soul from her psychosexual development. Consequently, she may find men emotionally or sexually unsafe, and instead gravitate toward relationships with women to meet her emotional and sexual desires. Sometimes female CSA, child sexual abuse victims, begin to dress androgynously or gain weight as a subconscious wall of protection to insulate them from the gaze of men. However, we all respond to trauma in different ways, so not every girl who is molested will develop SSA. Some women respond in an opposite manner, becoming promiscuous with men so that they are always the aggressor and never again the victim. If a boy is sexually molested by a male perpetrator, he can become confused, thinking, why did he choose me and not some other boy? There must be something deficient about my masculinity. And why did my body respond that way? Does that mean I'm gay? The enemy will gladly answer yes to that question. People who molest children know how to groom their prey and often target the gender non-conforming boy who already feels disconnected from his own father and longs for male affirmation. The evil one knows how to capitalize on our vulnerabilities, but we all respond to trauma differently. Not every boy who is sexually molested develops SSA, same-sex attraction, but many do. In addition to the emotional trauma of CSA, child sexual abuse, biological factors may come into play as well. The chemicals released during orgasm, vasopressin in men and oxytocin in women, serve as powerful bonding agents. If a child's first pleasurable sexual experience occurs with someone of the same sex, the associated chemical release may influence his or her desire to bond with the same sex from that point forward, to say nothing of the demonic influences that may work to reinforce unhealthy desires. The chemical release in the brain may also explain why exposure to homosexual pornography at a young age can have devastating effects. Practical examples. Human sexuality is complicated, so not every child who experiences gender nonconformity, adverse family dynamics, or sexual abuse develops same-sex attraction. For some, peer pressure, exposure to gay pornography, or sexual experimentation open the door for sexual struggles. It has been said there's many a way to same-sex attraction. It's not always a cut and dried process, which is why we need the Holy Spirit to discern what may have contributed to disordered sexual desires. However, in both my practical ministry experience and dissertation research, gender nonconformity, adverse family dynamics, and child sexual abuse are some of the most common developmental influences. In my 30 case studies, 100% of the participants experienced at least one of those influences. The vast majority, 93%, experienced at least two, and almost half, 47%, experienced all three. At the same time, we can't say that there's a singular cause of same-sex attraction. It's often a combination of factors, which may include our personality temperament, physical traits, life experiences, fallen, broken nature, and demonic influences that capitalize on our vulnerabilities. Below are two examples of how a combination of factors contribute to the development of same-sex attraction, SSA. John is the youngest of two sons. His older brother is athletic and manly, just like their dad. John, on the other hand, is sensitive and in touch with his emotions, doesn't have an athletic talent, and excels at art, music, writing, and cooking. Due to their similar personality temperaments, John's dad seems to connect more easily with John's brother, while John connects more easily with his mother. John's peers tease him, calling him all the traditional insulting names, confirming John's perception that he doesn't fit in with boys and will never be able to measure up to his dad or his brother as a real man among men. John's lack of emotional connection with his dad leaves him with a longing in his heart for male affection, making him vulnerable to inappropriate attention from an older man who takes advantage of him sexually. John wonders why the predator chose him instead of the athletic boys, and why his body responded positively to sexual touch from another male. He concludes that he must be gay. Jill is an only child, and her father is an alcoholic who is verbally and physically abusive to her mother. Jill sees men as unsafe and her mother as weak, and concludes that she never wants to be like her mom. Unbeknownst to her parents, an older male cousin sexually abused Jill over the course of several years, reinforcing Jill's perception that men are not safe. Jill vows that she will never make herself vulnerable with a man. As she reaches puberty, Jill finds herself attracted to women who exhibit a strength she saw lacking in her own mother, and she develops a deep emotional connection with women. Finding safety in the arms of other women, Jill concludes that she must be a lesbian. As illustrated in these examples, there is no one factor that quote-unquote causes someone to be gay. Most often, it's a unique blend of environmental influences interacting with one's personality, temperament, and biological traits. Additional factors are demonic influences that seek to destroy our sexuality because it images God, as we shared in earlier videos. This complicated mixture could explain why one identical twin experiences SSA, same-sex attraction, while the other doesn't. Consider these examples. Perhaps the sexual abuse of one twin, but not the co-twin. Perhaps reactions to perceived parental preference of one twin above the other. Maybe one twin is exposed to gay pornography and develops a habit, but his co-twin does not. Maybe one male twin misinterprets his intense envy and admiration of confident, popular boys and wonders if he is gay. Perhaps one is persistently unlucky with girls, unlike his co-twin, and seriously questions whether he might be gay. One might be the target of denigrating sexual innuendo from other males, but not the co-twin. A slightly gender atypical physical feature may sometimes be taken obsessively to heart by one child, but not another. As illustrated above, the two children with shared DNA could be raised in a similar environment yet experience different outcomes. No two children respond in the same way. I have a friend who was sexually abused by her father, and she never struggled with her sexuality, but she has other issues stemming from abuse. Another friend who was also sexually abused by her father, and she adopted a homosexual lifestyle. We all break in different ways based on our own varying personality temperaments and biological traits. Peer influence, support systems, and other factors may be involved. Last, some women find themselves in a lesbian relationship somewhat by surprise. Teen girls, for example, can become emotionally dependent on their best friend, and the relationship may turn sexual without their ever having intended that to happen. The same can happen when a married woman, discontented with her husband, finds emotional solace in a girlfriend, and their relationship turns sexual. Such scenarios may be more common among women because they approach sex differently than men. For women, the emotional attraction usually comes first, followed by the physical. For men, usually physical attraction comes first, followed by the emotional. Consequently, some men may become aware of disordered sexual desires from an early age, while some women may not discover disordered sexual desires until later in life. The bottom line is that there is no singular formula as to how same-sex attractions develop. However, it can be helpful to investigate the potential impact of environmental influences, including, but not limited to, gender nonconformity, adverse family dynamics, or childhood sexual abuse. The next video will look at how transgender desires develop.